I stood at the edge of the ballroom, my simple dress a stark contrast to the sea of silk and diamonds that filled the space. The crystal chandeliers cast their merciless light on everything, illuminating the gulf between my world and theirs. Vivian's wedding was exactly what I expected, extravagant, ostentatious, and designed to showcase the Sterling family's wealth. The music swelled, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed off the marble walls. I shouldn't have been here. I didn't want to be here. But Eleanor had made sure I received an invitation, not out of kindness, but out of cruelty. She wanted me to witness their triumph, to feel the full weight of my own insignificance. I had barely taken 3 steps into the room when I heard her voice, sharp and carrying, designed to cut through the ambient noise. Eleanor Sterling didn't whisper her insults. She projected them. "Oh my God, Aurora! You actually dared to show your face here?" Her voice dripped with false surprise, loud enough that heads began to turn. She glided toward me in a gown that probably cost more than I'd earned in the past year, her smile predatory. "I thought you'd gotten used to dinner consisting of instant noodles by now. Don't ruin our family portrait with your pathetic presence, dear." The conversations around us began to die down. People were watching now, anticipating the show. My stepmother had always been skilled at making spectacles out of my humiliation. I tried to hold my head high, but my hands were trembling. I clasped them together, feeling my nails dig into my palms. Eleanor moved closer, her perfume overwhelming, her eyes glittering with malice. In her hand was a glass of red wine. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. She reached out as if to embrace me, then stumbled forward with theatrical precision. The wine splashed across my chest, staining my dress a deep crimson. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Eleanor said, her voice saccharine sweet, though her eyes told a different story. They were filled with satisfaction, with triumph. She had marked me, humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered in this city. The whispers started immediately. I could hear fragments of conversation, see the way people pointed at me, their faces twisted with amusement or pity. Vivian stood near the wedding cake, her new husband Brandon beside her. They were smiling, those cold, contemptuous smiles I'd come to know so well. Neither moved to help me, neither said a word in my defense. Across the room, I spotted my father. Richard Vance stood with a group of business associates, a champagne flute in his hand. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw him flinch. Then he looked away, lifting his glass to his lips, pretending he hadn't seen. Pretending his daughter wasn't standing in the middle of his stepdaughter's wedding with wine dripping down her dress, while his wife grinned in satisfaction. Something inside me snapped, not broke, but transformed. The trembling in my hands stopped. I lifted my head and looked directly at Eleanor, letting her see the fire that had been building in my eyes for 2 years. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stared at her with such intensity that her triumphant expression faltered for just a second. My silence was more frightening than any words I could have hurled at her. The tension in the room became suffocating. People were waiting to see what I would do, how I would react to this latest humiliation. Would I run crying from the room? Would I cause a scene? Would I simply disappear, as I had done so many times before? Then I heard it. At first it was just a low rumble in the distance, barely audible over the string quartet. But it grew louder, more insistent. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air, getting closer and closer. The music faltered. People moved toward the windows, confusion rippling through the crowd. The sound was so close now that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The massive doors at the entrance to the ballroom burst open. Wind rushed in, strong enough to send napkins flying and flower arrangements toppling. Women grabbed at their elaborate hairstyles. Men steadied themselves against the sudden gust. All eyes turned to the doorway. He walked in like he owned not just the room, but the entire world. Ethan Hayes moved with the kind of confidence that comes from building empires and breaking barriers. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his silver hair catching the light from the chandeliers. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. He scanned the room once, his gaze moving past the shocked faces, past Eleanor's pale expression, past the gaping wedding party, until his eyes found me. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward me. Eleanor was in his path, still holding her empty wineglass, her mouth opening to say something. Ethan brushed past her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture, not even sparing her a glance. The dismissal was so absolute, so complete, that Eleanor actually stumbled backward. Ethan stopped in front of me. A smile played at the corners of his mouth, knowing and purposeful. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent ballroom. "The helicopter is ready. The world is waiting." The room had frozen. Every single person stood motionless, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. Eleanor had gone deathly pale, her carefully applied makeup suddenly garish against her white skin. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, but no sound came out. Across the room, I heard the distinct sound of shattering glass. My father had dropped his champagne flute. It lay in pieces at his feet, golden liquid spreading across the pristine marble floor. Vivian's mouth hung open, her perfect lipstick suddenly making her look like a gasping fish. I looked at Ethan's outstretched hand, then up into his face. In his eyes, I saw understanding, respect, and something else, a promise of the future we had been building together in secret for the past 2 years. I turned my head slowly to look at Eleanor. Our eyes met, and this time, I let myself smile. It was a cold smile, sharp as a blade. "Your little performance is over, Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice steady and clear. I placed my hand in Ethan's, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. "It's been over for quite some time. You just didn't know it yet." We turned together and walked toward the door. Behind us, chaos was beginning to erupt. People were shouting questions, voices rising in confusion and excitement. I heard Eleanor scream something, her composure finally shattering. But I didn't look back. I kept my eyes forward, my hand secure in Ethan's, and that smile of victory playing on my lips. With each step, I felt lighter, as if chains I'd been carrying for years were finally falling away. The helicopter waited on the lawn, its blades still turning, creating a circle of wind and noise that kept the curious at bay. Ethan helped me up into the leather seat, and as we lifted off, I looked down one last time at the ballroom, at the tiny figures of people rushing to the windows to watch us leave. The Sterling mansion grew smaller and smaller beneath us, until it was nothing more than a lit square in the darkness. "You handled that beautifully," Ethan said over the headset, his voice warm with approval. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. I wanted to do that for 2 years. "I know." He reached over and handed me a tablet. "But now the real work begins. Are you ready?" I opened my eyes and took the device, looking at the contract displayed on the screen. It was everything we had planned, everything we had worked toward in secret. "I've been ready since the day you found me." "Correction," Ethan said, a rare smile crossing his usually stern face. "Since the day you found me." He was right. It hadn't been him who discovered me. I had discovered him. Or rather, I had discovered the truth that would change everything. 2 years ago, I had been in a very different place. After Eleanor married my father, my life had deteriorated rapidly. At first, it had been small things. Snide comments about my appearance, my clothes, my friends. Then it escalated. Eleanor made sure I was excluded from family dinners, family photos, family decisions. She painted me as ungrateful, as difficult, as someone who refused to accept her as a parent. My father, weak and desperate to keep his new wealthy wife happy, had gone along with every suggestion she made. Then came the night Eleanor told me to leave. Not in private, not with any pretense of compassion. She had done it in front of dinner guests, influential people from her social circle. She had accused me of stealing a bracelet, a lie so transparent that even I was shocked by its audacity. When I protested, she had slapped me across the face and told me I was no longer welcome in her home. My father had sat there, silent, while his wife threw his daughter out onto the street. I left with nothing but the clothes on my back and $50 my father had slipped into my pocket when Eleanor wasn't looking, as if that made up for his cowardice. But Eleanor hadn't been content with just removing me from her house. She had systematically destroyed my reputation, calling every contact I had, spreading rumors that I was unstable, unreliable, a thief. I lost my job within a week. I lost my apartment the week after that. Friends stopped returning my calls. Doors that had once been open slammed shut. I ended up in a tiny, decrepit apartment in the worst part of the city, working whatever jobs I could find, waiting tables, cleaning offices, anything that paid cash and didn't require references. I had gone from being Richard Vance's daughter, living in comfort, if not happiness, to being completely alone and destitute. It was during one of those office cleaning jobs that I met my destiny. The building I was cleaning housed several small companies, most of them barely surviving startups with big dreams and little capital. One of them was Stellar Dynamics, an aerospace company that was attempting to revolutionize satellite technology. I worked the night shift, emptying trash cans and mopping floors when everyone had gone home. Except one night, not everyone had gone home. I had been cleaning the conference room when I noticed a folder left open on the table, papers spread across the surface. I shouldn't have looked. It wasn't my business. But something caught my eye, a number that didn't make sense. I moved closer, my curiosity overriding my caution. They were financial documents, projections, and budgets for an upcoming project. And there, buried in the columns of numbers, was a catastrophic error. Someone had misplaced a decimal point in the fuel consumption calculations. An error that would have resulted in millions of dollars in losses and potentially a failed mission that could destroy the company's reputation before it even got off the ground. I stood there, mop in hand, staring at those papers. I could walk away. It wasn't my problem. These people didn't know me, didn't care about me. I was just the woman who cleaned their floors. but I couldn't do it. I couldn't let this mistake go unnoticed. I left a note, detailed and precise, explaining the error and showing the correct calculations. I signed it only with my first name and left it on top of the folder. The next night, when I came in to clean, there was a man waiting in the conference room, Ethan Hayes. At the time, I didn't know who he was, didn't know that he was a legend in the aerospace industry. A man who had built 3 successful companies and was now investing his considerable fortune into this 4th venture. I just knew that he looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through all my defenses. "You wrote this," he said, holding up my note. It wasn't a question. I thought about denying it, but something in his expression told me that lying would be pointless. "Yes." "Do you have any idea how much money you saved this company? How many careers you just protected?" "I just saw a mistake," I said quietly. I couldn't let it go. He studied me for a long moment, and I became acutely aware of my stained cleaning uniform, my hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, the smell of floor cleaner that clung to my clothes. I was nothing, nobody, and here was this man who looked like he had stepped out of a Fortune 500 magazine. "What's your name?" he asked. "Aurora Vance." "Aurora," he repeated as if tasting the word. "Do you know anything about aerospace engineering?" "No," I admitted, "but I know math, and I know when numbers don't add up." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his stern face. "I'm going to make you an offer, Aurora Vance. You can say no, and I'll understand. But I think you're the kind of person who sees opportunities even in the darkest places." That was how it began. Ethan didn't just give me a job. He gave me a purpose, a future, and most importantly, he gave me the tools to reclaim my life. What he didn't tell me at first was that he was dying. The cancer had been diagnosed 6 months before we met, and the doctors had given him 2 years, maybe 3 if he was lucky. He had been looking for someone to carry on his legacy, someone with integrity and intelligence and hunger. He found all of that in a cleaning woman with a gift for numbers and nothing left to lose. The training was brutal. Ethan didn't believe in coddling or sympathy. He threw me into the deep end of every situation, forcing me to learn to swim or drown. I attended meetings with executives who looked at me like I was an unwelcome insect. I analyzed data until my eyes burned. I learned to negotiate with people who were twice my age and 10 times more experienced. I learned to speak with confidence, to dress with purpose, to walk into a room and command attention. But more than that, Ethan taught me to value myself. He showed me that my intelligence, my integrity, my determination were worth more than any family name or inherited wealth. He taught me that power wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built, brick by brick, decision by decision. 6 months into my training, he sat me down in his office and told me the truth about his illness. I had suspected something was wrong. The occasional wince of pain, the days when he looked more tired than usual, the pills I sometimes saw him take. "I'm dying, Aurora," he said bluntly. "I have maybe a year left, possibly less." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. In just 6 months, Ethan had become more of a father to me than Richard had ever been. "There must be something we can do, some treatment." "I've done all the treatments," he interrupted gently. "Now I'm just trying to make sure my life's work doesn't die with me." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You're not just my successor, Aurora. You're my hope. I want you to prove to the world that kindness and intelligence can triumph over cruelty and cowardice. I want you to show them that a person's worth isn't determined by their family or their bank account, but by what they choose to do with the opportunities they're given." Over the next year and a half, I absorbed everything Ethan could teach me. I worked 20-hour days, learning not just the aerospace business but the intricacies of corporate law, finance, negotiations, and strategy. I transformed myself from a discarded daughter into a force to be reckoned with, and all the while, I watched Ethan grow weaker, saw the cancer slowly claim him despite his iron will. 3 months before Vivian's wedding, Ethan made it official. In a private ceremony with lawyers present, he signed over 75% of Grant Aerodynamics to me. The company had absorbed Stellar Dynamics 6 months earlier, and under our combined leadership, it had become one of the most promising aerospace companies in the country. The remaining 25% was divided among minor shareholders, including, ironically, Eleanor Sterling, who had invested through one of her husband's shell companies years ago. Ethan had smiled when he told me about that particular detail. "She has no idea that the company she owns a piece of is about to be run by the stepdaughter she threw away. I wish I could be there to see her face when she finds out." "You will be," I promised him, though we both knew it was a lie. He was too weak to travel by then, confined to his home with round-the-clock care. The day before the wedding, I visited him one last time. He could barely speak, the cancer having spread to his lungs and throat. But his eyes were still sharp, still aware. "Tomorrow," I whispered, holding his hand. "Tomorrow I take it all back." He squeezed my fingers with what little strength he had left. His lips moved, forming words without sound. But I understood. "Make them pay." "Now," sitting in the helicopter as we soared over the city lights, I pulled out my phone and looked at the message that had come through just minutes before Ethan's dramatic entrance at the wedding. It was from his nurse. He passed peacefully at 8:47 p.m. His last words were, "She's ready." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. I would grieve for Ethan, for the father I had found and lost too soon. But not tonight. Tonight was for the battle he had prepared me to fight. "What is it?" Ethan's assistant, Marcus, asked from the co-pilot seat. Marcus had been in on our plans from the beginning, one of the few people who knew the full scope of what we were about to do. "Ethan is gone," I said quietly. Marcus's face fell, genuine grief crossing his features. He had worked with Ethan for over a decade. He held on long enough to see you start this. "He gave me everything I needed to finish it," I replied, straightening in my seat. I looked down at the tablet, at the documents that would change everything. Now I'm going to make sure his death means something. We landed on the roof of the Grant Aerodynamics building, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that dominated the downtown skyline. The building was mostly empty at this hour, but I had made sure that the top floor, where the executive offices and main conference room were located, was fully staffed and lit. I had sent out meeting notices 2 weeks ago, scheduling an emergency board meeting for 9 o'clock on the night of Vivian's wedding. At the time, I was listed as Ethan's executive assistant. No one had thought to question why I was calling the meeting instead of Ethan himself. I changed in Ethan's private office, shedding the wine-stained dress and replacing it with a power suit in deep navy blue, tailored to perfection. I pinned my hair up in a sleek bun, applied minimal but strategic makeup, and slipped my feet into heels that added 3 inches to my height. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The broken girl who had been humiliated at a wedding 2 hours ago was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she could buy and sell anyone who got in her way. Marcus knocked on the door. "They're all here." Eleanor and Richard arrived 10 minutes ago. Vivian and Brandon came straight from the reception. "They're not happy about having to leave their wedding early." "Good," I said, checking my reflection one last time. "Unhappy is exactly where I want them." I picked up the leather portfolio that contained copies of all the documents I would need, the evidence I had been gathering for months with Ethan's help. Everything was in order. Everything was perfect. "One more thing," Marcus said, handing me a slim envelope. "Ethan asked me to give you this before the meeting. He wrote it last week." I opened it carefully, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. Ethan's handwriting was shaky but legible. "Aurora, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't mourn me. I've lived a full life and I'm dying satisfied, knowing that my life's work is in capable hands. What you're about to do tonight isn't about revenge. It's about justice. It's about showing the world that actions have consequences, that cruelty doesn't go unpunished, and that the people we throw away are sometimes the ones who rise highest. You are my legacy, Aurora. You are my phoenix. Now go show them what happens when you try to burn someone who's already walked through fire. With pride and love, E.H." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the inner pocket of my jacket, right over my heart. Then I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked toward the conference room. The door was heavy, solid mahogany with brass fixtures. I could hear voices on the other side, Eleanor's shrill tone rising above the others. I took one deep breath, wrapped my fingers around the handle, and pushed the door open. The conversation died instantly. Every head turned toward me, and I watched as confusion gave way to recognition, then to disbelief. The conference room was exactly as imposing as it needed to be, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 20, and that unmistakable aura of money and power that permeated every surface. Eleanor was standing near the window, still in her wedding attire, her face flushed with anger. Richard sat at the table, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo. Vivian had changed into a simple dress but still wore her elaborate wedding jewelry, and Brandon looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Around the table sat the other board members, 7 in total, all of them looking confused about why they had been summoned on a Saturday night. I didn't greet anyone. I didn't apologize for my dramatic entrance at the wedding. I simply walked to the head of the table, to the chair that had been Ethan's, and I dropped my portfolio on the surface with a sound that echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Good evening," I said, my voice cool and professional. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know this is unusual, but then again, the circumstances are unusual. My name is Aurora Vance, and as of 3 p.m. this afternoon, following the death of CEO Ethan Hayes, I am now the majority shareholder and acting CEO of Grant Aerodynamics." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor started laughing, a high-pitched, ugly sound. "This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. Someone tell me this is a joke. You," she pointed at me with a trembling finger, "you think you can just waltz in here and claim to run a multi-billion-dollar company? You're nobody. You're nothing. Just a pathetic little girl who I threw out of my house where she belonged." I didn't react to her outburst. I simply opened my portfolio and began distributing documents to each board member. In front of you, you'll find copies of Ethan Hayes' last will and testament, executed and notarized 3 months ago. You'll also find stock transfer agreements, signed and witnessed, transferring 75% of Grant Aerodynamics shares to me. All documents have been verified by our legal team and are legally binding. Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face had gone from red to pale in a matter of seconds. Aurora, sweetheart, you don't understand what you're doing. Running a company like this, it takes experience, it takes connections. It takes intelligence and integrity. I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. 2 things you've proven you don't have, father. The word came out like a curse. Now sit down. To my surprise, he did. He sank back into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. Vivian found her voice next. This is insane. Ethan Hayes must have been senile, or sick, or you must have manipulated him somehow. There's no way he would have left his company to a cleaning woman. I turned to look at her, letting my gaze travel over her expensive dress, her diamond earrings, her carefully styled hair. You're right about one thing, Vivian. Ethan was sick. He was dying, but his mind was perfectly clear right up until the end, and I was never just a cleaning woman. I was the person who saved this company from bankruptcy 2 years ago. I was the person who identified and corrected a critical error that would have cost millions. I was the person Ethan chose to train, to mentor, and to trust with his legacy. I pressed a button on the control panel built into the table, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. Let me show you exactly what I've been doing for the past 2 years while you all believed I was struggling in poverty. The screen displayed a series of presentations, financial reports, and project summaries. Each one bore my name, my analysis, my recommendations. I walked them through the satellite communications project that had increased company revenue by 40%, the manufacturing efficiency improvements that had cut costs by 22%, the 3 major contracts I had personally negotiated with international clients. Every success Grant Aerodynamics had achieved in the past 18 months had my fingerprints all over it. Ethan Hayes didn't leave his company to a cleaning woman, I said quietly. He left it to the person who helped him build an empire. The board members were leaning forward now, studying the documents in front of them, looking at the screen, and then back at me with new eyes. I could see the shift happening, the realization that I wasn't an imposter or a con artist. I was exactly what I claimed to be, but Eleanor wasn't finished. She moved toward the table, her hands clenched into fists. I don't care what papers you have or what lies you've told. You seduced that old man, manipulated him when he was weak and dying. You're nothing but a gold-digging whore who... Careful, Mrs. Sterling. My voice cut through her tirade like ice. You're about to say something actionable in front of 7 witnesses and a recording system. She stopped, her mouth open, breathing hard. I could see the rage in her eyes, the absolute fury at losing control of the situation. Now, I continued, turning my attention back to the board. Let's discuss why I called this meeting tonight. It's not just to announce the change in leadership. It's to address some serious irregularities that have come to my attention regarding certain shareholders and their conduct. I brought up a new presentation on the screen, this one showing financial transactions, dated emails, and scanned documents. Eleanor Sterling, you hold 3% of this company through investment vehicles connected to your husband's business interests. What you may not be aware of is that for the past 18 months, someone with access to your accounts has been engaging in insider trading, using confidential information about Grant Aerodynamics projects to manipulate stock prices and make illegal profits. Eleanor's face went from angry to panicked in an instant. That's not I don't know anything about. Additionally, I continued, my voice growing harder, we've discovered significant evidence that company resources were being siphoned off through fraudulent vendor accounts. Money that should have been going to legitimate suppliers was instead being redirected to shell companies. Shell companies that, interestingly enough, are registered to various family members of our CFO, Richard Vance. Richard stood up again. This time his face was white as paper. Now wait just a minute. I would never, Aurora. You have to believe me. I didn't. Believe you? I looked at him, letting all the pain and betrayal of the past 2 years show in my eyes. Believe you the way I believed you when you said you'd protect me? Believe you the way I believed you loved me? Believe you the way I believed you when you promised my mother, on her deathbed, that you would always take care of me? The room had gone absolutely silent. I could see some of the board members looking uncomfortable, but I didn't care. This moment had been 2 years in the making. You let your wife throw me out onto the street like garbage, I said, my voice shaking with emotion I could no longer contain. You gave me $50 and told me you were sorry, but there was nothing you could do. You watched her destroy my reputation, cost me my job, my home, my dignity. You stood by while she humiliated me at every opportunity, and all the while, you were stealing from the company that gave you a position you didn't earn and didn't deserve. I didn't know about the vendor fraud, Richard said desperately. I swear, Aurora, I didn't know. Maybe someone in my department. Your signature is on every approval, I said coldly. Your credentials were used to access the accounts. Your personal email was used to communicate with the shell companies. Unless you're suggesting someone stole your identity for 18 months without you noticing, you're lying. Again. I turned to the rest of the board. According to the corporate bylaws established by Ethan Hayes when he founded this company, any shareholder or board member found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, or any action that harms the company's interests is immediately stripped of all positions, shares, and benefits. Furthermore, they are liable for full restitution of any damages caused. This is preposterous, Eleanor shrieked. You can't prove any of this. You're making it all up because you're vindictive and jealous. I pressed another button, and the screen changed to show a video. It was security footage from the company server room, showing Richard entering late at night, accessing computer terminals he had no authorization to use. The timestamp was from 6 months ago. This is from our internal security system, I said. We have 47 separate instances of unauthorized access. We have email trails. We have bank records. We have testimony from the FBI. That last word hit like a bomb. The FBI? Someone at the table asked. Ethan and I reported our suspicions to federal authorities 3 months ago, I explained. They've been investigating quietly. As of this afternoon, arrest warrants have been prepared for Richard Vance and Eleanor Sterling on charges of fraud, insider trading, and embezzlement. I've been asked to cooperate fully with their investigation, which I intend to do. Care you? Eleanor grabbed the edge of the table, swaying slightly. Vivian rushed to her side, but Eleanor pushed her away. You're doing this for revenge, she hissed at me. You're destroying your own family out of spite. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing directly in front of her. We were nearly the same height now, with my heels, and I looked her dead in the eye. Family? I said softly. You destroyed my family the day you married my father. You made it your mission to erase me, to make me feel worthless and unwanted. You succeeded, Mrs. Sterling. You made me feel worthless. But you know what you didn't count on? You didn't count on me finding people who could see my actual worth. You didn't count on me being smart enough and strong enough to survive everything you did to me. And you definitely didn't count on me being patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to reveal that the pathetic little girl you threw away is now the person who owns your future. I turned back to the board. I'm invoking the corporate bylaws. Eleanor Sterling is hereby stripped of her shares in this company and removed from any and all positions. Richard Vance is terminated as CFO, effective immediately, and his shares are forfeit. Vivian Sterling and Brandon Sterling, as individuals who benefited from the fraudulent transactions and who had knowledge of illegal activities, are also barred from any future involvement with Grant Aerodynamics. You can't do this, Vivian shouted. You can't just destroy people's lives because you're angry. I'm not destroying lives, I corrected her. I'm enforcing consequences. There's a difference. You all had choices. You chose cruelty. You chose greed. You chose to use and abuse people you considered beneath you. Now you get to live with those choices. Richard had fallen to his knees, actually on his knees, tears streaming down his face. Aurora, please, I'm your father. I made mistakes, I know I did, but please don't do this. We'll lose everything. Eleanor will go to prison. Please, baby girl, please. Something inside me cracked when he called me that. Baby girl. He hadn't called me that since before my mother died, since before Eleanor entered our lives and poisoned everything. I knelt down so I was at his level. You're my father, I said quietly, so only he could hear. That's why this hurts so much. That's why I wish things were different. But you stopped being my dad the day you chose her over me. You stopped being my family when you let her throw me away like trash. I loved you. I would have forgiven you for so many things. But you didn't just abandon me. You helped her destroy me. And then you stole from good people, from a company that trusted you, from a man who gave you a second chance when no one else would. I stood up, looking down at him. I can't save you from this, Dad. I won't save you from this. You made your choices. Now live with them. I walked back to my position at the head of the table. Security will escort the Sterling Vance family from the building. Effective immediately, they are banned from all Grant Aerodynamics properties. Board members will reconvene Monday morning to discuss transition plans and to review candidates for the CFO position. This meeting is adjourned. I pressed the intercom button. Security to the executive conference room, please. Within minutes, 4 security officers entered. They weren't gentle or polite, but they weren't rough either. They were simply professional, guiding Eleanor, Richard, Vivian, and Brandon toward the door. Eleanor was screaming, hurling insults and threats. Richard was crying. Vivian had actually fainted and had to be supported by Brandon, who looked like he was in shock. As they were led away, Eleanor turned back one last time. Her face was twisted with hatred, mascara running down her cheeks. You'll regret this, you little bitch. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I didn't respond. I simply stood there, watching her be escorted out, watching my former family disappear through the doorway. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and suddenly the room felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Finally, Margaret Chen, the head of our engineering division and the longest-serving board member after Ethan, spoke up. "Miss Vance, I have to say, I've never seen anything quite like that in 30 years of corporate governance." "I apologize for the dramatics," I said, my professional demeanor sliding back into place, but I felt it was important to handle this situation decisively and transparently. "Ethan chose well," Margaret said, a small smile on her face. "He always had an eye for potential. I voted against bringing Richard Vance on as CFO 2 years ago. Ethan overruled me. I think he did it knowing exactly what would happen." I looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" She gestured to the empty chairs where my father and stepmother had been sitting. "Ethan Hayes was many things, but he was never naive. When he hired your father, he already suspected financial irregularities. He wanted someone in place who would make mistakes, who would be sloppy. He was building a case, gathering evidence. And then you showed up, this brilliant young woman with every reason to want justice. Do you really think it was coincidence that he found you? That he happened to be in the office the night you discovered that calculation error?" I felt my breath catch. "He was looking for me?" "He was looking for someone like you," Margaret corrected. "Someone smart enough to see what others missed, brave enough to speak up, and damaged enough to understand what it means to fight for something that matters. He found his perfect protege, and he found the perfect person to help him clean house." I sank into my chair, processing this information. Had Ethan orchestrated everything? Had my entire redemption been part of someone else's plan? As if reading my thoughts, Margaret continued, "But don't think that diminishes what you've accomplished, Aurora. Ethan gave you opportunities, but you're the one who seized them. You're the one who worked 20-hour days, who learned everything he had to teach, who turned yourself into someone worthy of his legacy. He planted the seed, but you grew the tree." The other board members nodded in agreement. David Morrison, our head of operations, spoke up. "I've reviewed your work over the past 2 years. Your satellite communications proposal alone saved this company from obsolescence. The contracts you negotiated with the European Space Agency, the efficiency improvements in manufacturing, the talent acquisition strategies you developed, those weren't handed to you. You earned every bit of this." "Thank you," I said quietly, feeling emotion threaten to overwhelm me. "That means more than you know." We spent the next hour going over logistics and transition plans. The board unanimously voted to confirm me as permanent CEO, not just acting. We discussed the FBI investigation, the legal ramifications, and how to handle the inevitable media storm. By the time the meeting ended, it was past midnight. I stood at the window after everyone left, looking out over the city lights. From this height, everything looked small and orderly, neat lines of streets and the tiny glow of windows in distant buildings. Somewhere down there, Eleanor and Richard were facing the destruction of everything they'd built. Vivian's perfect wedding day had ended in catastrophe. Brandon had married into a family that was now toxic to his own political ambitions. I waited to feel satisfaction, triumph, joy at their downfall. Instead, I just felt tired and oddly empty. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "The media has gotten wind of what happened. NBC wants an interview. So does the Wall Street Journal. How do you want to handle it?" I typed back. "Set up a press conference for Monday morning. I'll make a statement then. Nothing before that." I needed time to think, to process, to figure out who I was now that the war was over. The next few days passed in a blur. The story exploded across every news outlet. Cinderella CEO, from homeless to head of aerospace giant. Read one headline, "Daughter's Revenge, Heiress Takes Down Corrupt Stepmother," declared another. The details of Eleanor's crimes, Richard's embezzlement, and my improbable rise became the hottest story in business news. My phone rang constantly. Interview requests, business propositions, people wanting to congratulate me or offer their services. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on the actual work of running the company. There were contracts to review, decisions to make, a leadership team to rebuild now that we'd lost our CFO. On Monday morning, I held the press conference. I wore another power suit, this one in charcoal gray, and I stood behind a podium bearing the Grant Aerodynamics logo. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and I waited calmly for the noise to die down before I spoke. "Good morning. I'm going to read a brief statement, and then I'll take a few questions. 3 days ago, Ethan Hayes, founder and former CEO of Grant Aerodynamics, passed away after a long battle with cancer. Mr. Hayes was a visionary, a mentor, and a man of unwavering integrity. In his will, he transferred majority ownership of this company to me, along with his faith that I would continue his mission of innovation, excellence, and ethical business practices." I paused, making eye contact with the journalists in the front row. In the course of assuming leadership, I discovered evidence of financial crimes being committed by several individuals connected to the company, including members of my own family. This information was turned over to federal authorities, and arrests have been made. I want to be clear. Grant Aerodynamics does not tolerate fraud, corruption, or any breach of the public trust. We will cooperate fully with law enforcement to ensure that justice is served. A reporter shouted out, "Miss Vance, isn't it true that your stepmother threw you out of your family home 2 years ago? Isn't this just revenge?" I looked directly at her. I won't discuss my personal family situation in detail, but I'll say this. When someone treats you cruelly, you have 2 choices. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it forge you into something stronger. I chose the latter. What happened this weekend wasn't revenge. It was accountability. There's a difference. "What are your plans for the company?" Another reporter called out. "Grant Aerodynamics will continue its mission of advancing aerospace technology. We have 3 major satellite launches scheduled for the next 18 months, and we're developing new propulsion systems that could revolutionize space travel. We're also launching a scholarship program in Ethan Hayes' name, providing opportunities for talented young people who might not otherwise have access to careers in STEM fields. Ethan believed in giving chances to people who were overlooked. I intend to honor that belief. How does it feel to go from poverty to running a billion-dollar company?" I smiled slightly. It feels like responsibility. It feels like purpose. And it feels like I finally understand what my mother meant when she told me, just before she died, that the measure of a person isn't where they start, but what they do with the journey. The press conference lasted 30 minutes. I answered questions about the technology, the company's future, and the legal situation. I deflected personal questions gracefully, keeping the focus on business and forward momentum. When it was over, I walked off the stage feeling like I'd passed some crucial test. Over the following weeks, the legal process ground forward. Eleanor was formally charged with insider trading and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, and her lawyers advised her to take a plea deal. She refused, insisting she would be vindicated. The trial date was set for 6 months out. Richard, on the other hand, cooperated fully with prosecutors. He provided testimony about Eleanor's schemes and admitted his own role in the vendor fraud. In exchange for his cooperation and guilty plea, he received a reduced sentence, 3 years in federal prison and full restitution of the stolen funds. He also had to liquidate all his assets to pay back what he'd taken. The man who had once lived in a mansion would be leaving prison with nothing. I didn't attend his sentencing hearing. I couldn't bring myself to sit in that courtroom and watch him be led away in handcuffs. Instead, I received a letter from him, forwarded through his lawyer. "Aurora, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to ever want to see me or speak to me again. I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've become, even though I had no hand in making you into this person. Your mother would be so proud too. I failed you in every way a father can fail a child, but somehow you succeeded anyway. You're stronger than I ever was, braver than I ever could be. I love you, and I'm sorry." That's all I wanted to say. "Dad." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in a drawer in my desk. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't respond either. Maybe someday I would be ready to talk to him, to try to salvage some kind of relationship. But not now. Not yet. Vivian and Brandon divorced quietly 6 months after the wedding. The scandal had destroyed Brandon's political career before it even began, and Vivian blamed me publicly for ruining her life. She gave interviews claiming I was vindictive and jealous, that I'd always hated her and plotted to destroy her family. I didn't respond to any of it. The truth was in the legal documents, in the evidence, in the facts. People could believe what they wanted. Eleanor's trial was a media circus. The prosecution presented email records, bank statements, testimony from accomplices, and a mountain of evidence that was impossible to refute. The defense tried to paint her as a victim of her husband's schemes, an innocent woman who had been used and manipulated. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay back nearly $3 million in illegal profits and damages. As she was led out of the courtroom, she looked at me one last time. I had attended the sentencing, sitting in the back of the gallery. Our eyes met across the room, and for just a moment, I saw something that might have been regret or fear or understanding. Then she was gone, and that chapter of my life was finally, truly closed. 6 months after taking over as CEO, I stood on the same rooftop where the helicopter had landed on the night of Vivian's wedding. Grant Aerodynamics had just successfully launched 2 satellites, completed a major contract with NASA, and announced record profits. The stock price had tripled. We'd hired 150 new employees and opened a research facility in Texas. I had done what Ethan asked. I had taken his company and made it better. I had proven that someone like me, someone who had been thrown away and written off, could build something extraordinary. But more than that, I had proven it to myself. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another journalist or business contact, but something made me open it. "The phoenix has risen from the ashes, Aurora. You exceeded even my expectations. I always knew you would, from the moment you left that note about the fuel calculations. You weren't just smart. You were brave enough to care when you didn't have to. That's what makes you extraordinary. Not the money or the power or the position. Never forget that. The world is lucky to have you in it. E.H. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. It was impossible. Ethan was dead. I'd attended his funeral, seen his body, watched him be laid to rest. But then I noticed the timestamp. The message had been scheduled to send exactly 6 months after his death. He had written it before he died, programmed it to reach me at this specific moment. Tears blurred my vision as I read it again. Even in death, Ethan was still teaching me, still guiding me, still believing in me. I looked out over the city, at the company building below, at the world spread out before me like a promise. I thought about my mother, who had died too young, who had never seen me grow up but who had given me the foundation of strength I'd needed. I thought about my father, sitting in a prison cell, paying for his mistakes. I thought about Eleanor, stripped of everything she'd valued, learning that cruelty always comes with a price. And I thought about myself, about the girl who had stood in a ballroom with wine staining her dress and murder in her heart, and the woman who now stood on top of the world. I wasn't that broken girl anymore. I wasn't defined by what had been done to me or taken from me. I was defined by what I had built, what I had learned, what I had become. A new message came through, this one from Blake Caldwell, a fellow CEO I'd met at a conference 3 months ago. We'd been talking more frequently lately, long conversations about business and life and philosophy. He made me laugh. He challenged me. He saw me as an equal, not as a project or a victim or a conquest. Dinner tomorrow night? No business talk, I promise. Just 2 people who deserve a night off from changing the world. I smiled and typed back, "You're on, but I get to choose the restaurant. Deal. See you at 7. I slipped my phone into my pocket and took one more look at the sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The city was beautiful from up here, full of possibility and promise and potential. Somewhere in my mind, I heard Ethan's voice, not from the message but from memory. One of the last conversations we'd had before he got too sick to speak. "What are you going to do after all this is over?" he had asked. "After you've won, after they've paid for what they did, after you have everything you fought for. What then, Aurora?" I had thought about it for a long time before answering. "I'm going to live," I'd said finally. "Really live. Not just survive, not just exist. I'm going to build something beautiful and find people who deserve my trust and wake up every morning grateful for the second chance I've been given. I'm going to stop letting my past define my future." "Good," he had said, smiling. "That's the answer I was hoping for." Now, standing on this rooftop with the wind in my hair and the world at my feet, I finally understood what he meant. Revenge had been necessary. Justice had been important. But neither of those things were the point. The point was what came after. The point was proving that you could be knocked down, dragged through hell, stripped of everything you thought you were, and still stand up and build something extraordinary. The point was that the people who tried to break you don't get to write your story. You do. I turned away from the edge and headed back inside. There was work to do, a company to run, a future to build. But for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not hope that things would get better, but certainty that I had the power to make them better. Not faith that someone would save me, but knowledge that I had already saved myself. The girl who had been thrown away had become a woman who built empires. The daughter who had been rejected had created a family of colleagues, friends, and allies who respected her. The victim had become the victor. And as I walked through the halls of my company, past employees who nodded respectfully, past offices where brilliant minds were solving impossible problems, past windows that reflected back a woman I barely recognized but was proud to be, I realized something profound. Eleanor had been right about one thing, all those years ago. I didn't belong in her world of meaningless wealth and casual cruelty, of treating people like disposable objects and measuring worth by bank accounts. I belonged somewhere better. I belonged in a world I had built myself, brick by brick, decision by decision, triumph by triumph. A world where kindness had power, where intelligence was currency, where the measure of success wasn't what you inherited but what you created. I had spent 2 years preparing for revenge. I would spend the rest of my life building something better than revenge. I would spend it building a legacy that mattered, touching lives that needed touching, creating opportunities for people like me who had been overlooked and underestimated. That was the real victory. Not the money, not the power, not even the satisfaction of seeing Eleanor and Richard face consequences for their actions. The real victory was becoming someone I could be proud of. Someone my mother would have been proud of. Someone who proved that your beginning doesn't determine your ending, that cruelty doesn't have to be answered with cruelty, and that the best revenge isn't destruction. The best revenge is building something so beautiful, so successful, so impactful that the people who threw you away have to live the rest of their lives knowing they discarded something priceless. I had become that something priceless, and nothing they could ever do would take that away from me. As I settled into my office, the city lights beginning to twinkle below, I opened my laptop and began reviewing plans for our next project. A revolutionary propulsion system that could make space travel affordable for scientific research institutions around the world. A project that would create hundreds of jobs, advance human knowledge, and carry Ethan's legacy forward into the future. My phone buzzed one more time. Another message from that mysterious number. P.S. Don't forget to live, Aurora. Don't forget to love, to laugh, to take risks on things that have nothing to do with business. You've proven you can succeed. Now prove you can be happy. That's an order from your former boss. E.H. I laughed out loud, the sound surprising me with its genuine joy. Even from beyond the grave, Ethan was looking out for me, pushing me to be not just successful but whole. Yes, sir, I whispered to the empty office. I'll do my best. And I would. I had spent 2 years learning how to fight, how to win, how to be strong. Now I would learn how to be happy, how to trust again, how to let people in without fear that they would destroy me. I would learn how to fly, not just survive. After all, I wasn't Aurora Vance, the rejected daughter anymore. I wasn't Aurora Vance, the victim of cruelty and abandonment. I was Aurora Vance, CEO of Grant Aerodynamics. I was Aurora Vance, who had walked through fire and emerged as steel. I was Aurora Vance, who had been given a second chance at life and had seized it with both hands. I was Aurora Vance, the phoenix who rose from the ashes, and my story was just beginning.